It's only semantics. How many times have you observed or taken part in an argument that remarked sagely at some point that the problem was only semantics? We all hear that. Most of us have said it ourselves. But semantics is a very odd word to put after that variety of only. The only that means. What follows here is rather insignificant. Semantics is extremely important. Your internal grammar has a number of interacting components, among which the semantic component is unquestionably the most powerful. In this chapter, we are going to take a look at a technique for using your semantic expertise as part of your communication strategy. Using the mechanism known as the semantic feature, we will begin with a scenario. Scenario 7. The expression on John's face was everything Sharon had been expecting. She looked down quickly at her hands folded tightly in her lap, anything to avoid meeting his eyes, where his contempt was obvious. "I hope I didn't hear you correctly," he said icily. "I hope what you intended to say was that you and Eve aren't quite finished with the project I assigned to you, but you'll have it ready in time for the presentation this afternoon." "No, John," Sharon said miserably. "There's nothing more with your hearing. I don't have anything to show you. Like I said before, every time Eve and I thought we could get started on it, there was another crisis, and we had to put it aside. I'm sorry." "You did know that the material was critical for this meeting in the afternoon." "Yes, we knew that," Sharon answered, still staring down at her hands. "We just failed to get it done in time, that's all. And we're both sick about it." There was no sympathy on his face at all. She could see that it would be a waste of time to try to explain, because Martin was too disgusted to hear anything she might say. She told him one more time how sorry she was and left the room with as much dignity as she could manage, thankful that at least she hadn't cried. Behind her, John Martin sat briefly rubbing his chin, his expression bland now, waiting to be sure she was gone. And then he picked up the phone and spoke to the secretary. "Katie," he said, "put in a hurry-up call for Josh Appleton and Tony Bellini. Tell them to get up here fast. Tell them we're ready for Plan B and we've only got 3 or 4 hours to work out the details. Thanks, Katie." Once again, these two people have been involved in a language interaction. Once again, they are living in two very different realities. Almost nothing about their communication could be described as syntonic. They are in entirely different wavelengths. Let's take a look at the perceptions each one has of what has taken place. Sharon's perception. John had given Sharon and Eve a special opportunity to demonstrate their competence in a way that openly told the men in advertising and marketing they would have to treat the two women with more respect in the future. The women had every intention of fulfilling that opportunity so well that no question could be raised as to whether it had been deserved. But then one crisis after another came along, and they found themselves hard-pressed, even working many extra hours just to carry out their regular duties and stay on top of everything they were obligated to do. It always seemed that there would be time to work on the slogans for the healthcare products in a day or two. But then, to their dismay, all the time was gone and the deadline was upon them, and they didn't even have enough rough notes ready to turn in. Eve had refused to face John Martin at all and called in sick. She was already getting her resume ready to look for another job and saw no reason to go through the ordeal. Sharon bitterly resented being left to face their boss by herself, but she knew she had to get it over with. She was not surprised when it went badly. She was only surprised that Martin didn't fire her on the spot. Sharon knows how badly she and Eve have failed. She is ashamed and miserable, and she realizes that even if John is too charitable to fire her outright, there's no way that she can go on working with him or with the men who were bypassed for the assignment. The thought of having to leave Mega and look for a position somewhere else is awful. She enjoys her job and doesn't want to leave it, but she has no choice. The only question in her mind now is how to wind up the episode in a way that will enable her to get a decent reference despite her current disgrace. Now, John's perception. John was willing to give Sharon and Eve the chance they had been demanding, and to do it openly. It was an experiment worth making, and one in which he made certain he could not lose. He offered the two women the assignment, but he didn't leave it at that. As insurance, he called in two of his best men and instructed them to do a few slogans for the new line themselves and be ready to argue for them, just in case. John prides himself on being fair and open-minded. He has been 99% convinced in advance that Sharon and Eve would make a mess of the assignment and that it was far beyond their abilities. But if they had managed to get the job done, he would have been delighted, and he would have rewarded them with responsible assignments thereafter. If they had come to him after their division ran into the series of unexpected crises and told him frankly that they couldn't get the task done, he would have regretted the hassle, but he would have dealt with it. He would have understood, and he would have made a note to give them an alternative opportunity as soon as something suitable came along. What they actually did, just letting the disaster happen and leaving him, so far as they knew, high and dry, was inexcusable. If he had been foolish as to rely on them, he would have been in serious trouble. But of course, he had known better than to do that. Still, John does not regret the experiment. On the contrary, from now on, he will be able to assign the semi-clerical work to Sharon and Eve with a clear conscience. It will now be a matter of record that he has given them their chance, a very fair and public chance, and they dropped the ball. He won't have to listen to any more nonsense about sexism after this, from either the women or the men, because the women have made his case for him. He is confident that they will now have a more accurate perception of their competence and will have the good sense to be satisfied with the excellent positions they hold in the firm and the very necessary work that they are doing. In John's opinion, the episode has come to a most satisfactory conclusion. Consequences. When Sharon and Eve hand in their resignations, John Martin is going to be astonished. In addition, he will conclude at once that they are leaving because their feelings are hurt, and that they are willing to sacrifice their jobs to punish both him and the corporation for offending them. This will be reflected in the references he gives them, and he will see to it that other references from Mega convey the same message. These results, unpleasant and costly for everyone involved, clearly demonstrating an inconvenient truth. False perceptions have real consequences. The problem here is only semantics, with a vengeance. If a meeting were held to discuss it, both sides would have a lot to say in defense of their actions, but nothing useful would be accomplished. There is a major reality gap here, with Sharon and Eve basing their words and their actions on one version of reality, and John and the other men basing theirs on a quite different version. And a primary source of the breakdown is the word that turned up in all the scenarios in Chapter 2, the word failure. Introducing the semantic feature. Let's back up slightly now and introduce the concept of semantic feature using a very simple example. Consider the two words mother and father. How do their meanings differ? Both words refer to physiological adults who are parents. Both words refer to human beings, but one refers to a female and the other to a male. In Figure 1, this information is shown in the form of semantic features, with plus or minus values indicated. Let's see how we do this. You can actually see it or not. All I can see is darkness. Okay. The parents are at the top of it, and then there's mother on one side and father on the other. Under mother is human, adult, parent, and female. Under the father is human, adult, parent, and female. They have pluses and minuses after them. When you find yourself thinking that the features contain an error because they should read plus or minus male rather than plus or minus female, your reaction points out dramatically the differences between language and logic. In logical terms, it makes absolutely no difference whether man is defined as plus male or negative female. They mean exactly the same thing, logically. In the real world, however, as proved by your reaction, the two are far from equivalent. Semantic features seem almost childlessly simple until one of them throws a phenomenon of this kind into sharp focus. There are other semantic features besides human, adult, and female, and that the semantic component of your grammar knows quite well would be part of a complete definition. Many of them are summarized by the features shown. For example, you don't need a feature specifying that mothers and fathers have 2 arms and 2 legs, but no feathers, because those features are subfeatures of plus human. A semantic feature diagram like Figure 1 only needs to show the essential minimum. Now let's apply the same technique to the word failure. What does it mean? What is its semantic content? We would all agree that failure has the semantic features minus concrete. That is, it's not a living thing or an object, but an abstraction. We would agree that it has the feature plus a negative. Although failure is a major industry in America, nobody openly looks upon it as a good thing. We could use either positive negative or negative positive to express this fact. We could word a feature to express the semantic content, a goal not reached. On all these things we would agree, and it would seem that we were all using the same word, with no possibility of misunderstanding. But as we explored this question, we would hit upon the single semantic feature that is responsible for so many communication breakdowns, with so many unfortunate real-world consequences attached to them. That feature is the feature final. The reason John Martin is so surprised when Sharon and Eve resign their jobs is because for him, a failure means only that something has been tried and hasn't worked, and that now it's necessary to try something else. This doesn't mean that failure ceases to be negative, but the negativeness is minor and has no shame attached. For both Sharon and Eve, however, failure is very final, and there is no option for trying anything new. Instead, failure means leaving the field in disgrace. This is an extremely common difference between men and women in American society. Everything John Martin and the two women did after the episode of the failed assignment was based upon this single feature difference, and the fact that none of them knew the difference existed. If John had known, he would have called Sharon and Eve in and made it clear to them that he did not perceive their failure. in this one episode as a catastrophe, and certainly not as anything worth quitting over. But he didn't know, and that didn't happen. Instead, he concluded that since they had no reason to quit, the only possible explanation for their leaving was childish hurt feelings and anger. If Sharon and Eve had known, the issue of leaving their jobs would never have come up. They would simply have chalked the failure up to experience and settled back to watch for an opportunity to try again, as John expected them to do. This is what happens when you are dealing with only semantics. But it doesn't have to happen. Not if you know that when the behavior of other people who share your language seems bizarre or incomprehensible or completely unlike your expectations, it's time to start searching for the key words that may be hiding a semantic feature mismatch. And it's time to determine what that mismatch is. In logical terms, it's often impossible to talk of features as being simply plus or minus, as in that figure 1. In real world terms, however, it's not that simple. John Martin certainly realizes that with regard to the scheduled meeting, Sharon and Eve's failure to have material ready is final, in that limited sense and to that limited degree. But it is far less final for him than it is for Sharon and Eve, just as it is far less negative for him than it is for them. One way to make this explicit is with a device like that shown in Figure 2, which is a rating scale for the weight of pluses and minuses on a given semantic feature. Here we go again with another one of these charts. I cannot tell if you can see it or not. The failure at the top, and then it has rays coming out. We got very non-final, which is 2 negatives, non-final, 1 negative. On the fence is 0. Final is a positive, very final is 2 positives. Figure 2, failure. We could prepare another diagram of the same kind for the feature negative, as it applies to the word failure. But notice your reaction to that idea, like your reaction to describing a man as plus or minus female. It is evidence that the semantic component of your internal grammar is fully operational and kicking in when you need it. You will immediately have thought, sure, we could do one of those for negative, but we don't need it because the degree of negativeness will always be the same as the degree of finalness. They will always match, and you are absolutely correct. The system is set up in Figure 2 is very neat. It ranges over 5 values from double minus for very non-final through the non-committal fence setting null symbol to double plus for very final. That range will serve us adequately in this book, but it should always be remembered that it is only a convenience, and that for any 50 real people you would need more than 5 values. Anytime you need to discuss a failure with individuals for whom the finality of failure has the weight of 10 pluses attached, you can predict that they will be far more upset about failing than persons for whom a double plus is sufficient. Anytime you need to discuss a failure with someone for whom the value of final for failure differs radically from your own, you will know in advance that communication will be difficult and explanations will be required, and you should prepare for the interaction with such differences firmly in mind. Obviously, if you had access to printouts of the internal grammars of other people, where you could find diagrams like Figure 1 and 2 for those people, it would be a great deal easier for you to understand their behavior and anticipate what they might say or do in an interaction. This is valuable information. Consider the obvious facts shown in Figure 3. This diagram sets out the stereotypical information, showing a single plus before final for the meaning of failure for an American executive, but 5 pluses before final for the Japanese executive. To make full use of the information, you would need to know how it fit the particular American or Japanese executive you were going to be dealing with. But the generalizations will apply to most such situations and are always valuable as a baseline from which to work. They are, in an interaction between Japanese and American executives, the degree to which failure is considered final will be significant. The second one, in such an interaction, the value of final will be higher for the Japanese executive than for the American executive. In Inc. for April 1986, Joel Kotkin and Yuriko Kashimoto state this emphatically, saying of Japanese managers, "It is actually fear that moves those managers. There is no tolerance for failure. The penalty for failure is out, finished." It's a powerful motivation. This cultural difference demonstrates that the view of every failure as disastrous is not confined to women. Most Japanese business people are male. It would be wonderful if somewhere there were a book, a sort of universal semantic directory, with diagrams like the one in Figure 3 for the executives and professionals of every ethnic and cultural group, so that before you went to negotiate grain prices with an Albanian executive, you could check the book to find out what the most typical situation is. It would be wonderful if a similar book existed for the varying professional cultures, so that before architects went to negotiate, here's our next chart. So that before architects went to negotiate contracts with neurosurgeons and vice versa, everyone involved could find out how the two groups ordinarily differ in their judgment about the finality and negativeness of a failure. Books of the same kind for every sort of subgroup would be invaluable, but nothing of the kind exists. However, because of your linguistic competence, you are fully equipped to use language to find out such information for yourself. You can then make a note of it for future reference, so that over the course of time you write your own universal semantic directory. I am sure I need not point out to you that it would be worth a vast sum of money. Getting semantic information. Throughout this book, I will be identifying words like failure that can reliably be recognized as reality gap words. You should learn them and be prepared, whenever they come up in your interactions with others, to answer the following 4 questions. What semantic features matter for this word? Which of those features are likely to show a mismatch? Is the person I am interacting with on the plus or the minus side for the critical feature? And last, where on the scale from double minus to double plus will that person's choice for the critical feature fall? If you do this routinely and always record what you learn, you will soon have a powerful database of semantic information available to you. There are 3 practical ways to carry out these steps. You can use information sources such as reference books, tapes, and videos, and other media. You can ask people who are already familiar with the group or groups in question, and you can ask individuals directly. Assume that we are still working with the word failure, and that the person you're going to interact with is a middle-aged male American executive from Texas. That will do. Getting information from media sources. Go straight to the indexes, either at your library or on your computer. If you don't have access to a computer information service, chances are your library does. What you want is a listing of titles from business magazines, news magazines, and such general publications as Harper's and Atlantic Monthly. containing words like Texas, Texan, Dallas, Houston. A quick glance at the list for even the past few years should give you several dozen to choose from. Read the articles that you've chosen, looking for clues to how the typical Texan reacts to failure. How many of the articles you read will depend on how much time you have, how important the interaction with the live Texan is, and how long the association is likely to last. If you were looking for examples dealing with Albanian executives or Laotian neurosurgeons, you would have to extend your search over a longer period of time because there would not be as much material available as there is about Texans. But the process would be the same. If you had time to turn to full-length books as well as shorter pieces, and if for the information was sufficiently important to you to make that investment worthwhile, that would be a next step. In some cases, such as the Japanese, you would have more resources available than you could possibly use. In others, you might have to turn to university libraries and obscure scholarly journals. Always, you would be asking the same question and looking for its answer. When a Texan fails, what does that Texan say and do? Getting information from other people. Ask them. Find yourself a Texan who is willing to discuss Texas with you, which will be easy. Frame your questions in a way that will encourage the Texan to answer you in detail. For example, I've always wondered, when a Texan drills an oil well and it turns up dry and then does it again and it turns up dry again, and that keeps happening until all the money to drill oil wells is gone, how does he act? What is he likely to say? Do you know anybody that's happened to? Don't say, if a Texan does such and such a thing. Say, when a Texan does it. That's important. In a later chapter, we'll talk about why that is true. If the Texan you're talking to doesn't seem helpful, say something that will extract the information you need by inviting correction of your errors like this. You're always hearing about Texans being different from other people, but I'm not at all sure I believe that. I'll bet you that when a Texan drills 3 oil wells in a row and they all come up dry and he's got no more money to drill with, the Texan sits down by the last dry well and bawls just like everybody else. Your strategy is to choose whatever you think is most unlikely in order to get a response something like this one. Sits down by the last dry well and bawls, a Texan. No way. Here's what a Texan does. And then, once the information is being provided to you, be very sure that you listen carefully. Getting information from the Texan himself. There are 2 ways to do this, the direct method and the indirect method. The indirect method requires no further explanation. You proceed with your Texan in the same way you would if you were trying to get information from someone else, as in the preceding paragraphs. If you want to use the direct method, however, you just explain like this. Bill, before we start negotiating this contract, I'd like to be sure that we're going to be speaking the same language. For example, take a word like failure. What does that word mean to you? If you are comfortable doing so and your Texan is cooperative, you can show him a few semantic feature diagrams. Explain what you're after and why, and ask him how his diagrams for failure would look, and then be prepared for him to ask you to return the favor. Semantics, oh yes, but not only semantics. Semantics properly used gives you the information you need in order to predict much of what is going to happen well in advance, so that you have ample time to prepare your strategy. Semantics helps you avoid unpleasant surprises for which you are completely unprepared. Semantics helps you avoid wasting time talking from a position that isn't even in the same version of reality as that of the person you're dealing with. And the semantic feature technique is one of the fastest and least complicated available for going straight to the heart of a potential semantic conflict and setting matters to rights. As we come to other words that are likely to create reality gaps, I'll point them out and discuss the application of the semantic feature technique to each one. In the meantime, you might want to take another look at scenarios 3 through 6 in Chapter 2 and decide what the semantic feature diagram for failure and the finalness of failure would look like for each of the individuals using that word or related word for the person or persons who heard them use it. Stalking the semantic feature. It's easy for me to say, find out what semantic features other people attach to the word X, but it is not enough. For a linguist, it constitutes negligence, as it would if a physician told you to find out what disease you are suffering from. It's no better than all those standard listen carefully platitudes I criticize. If I had no other choice, I would tell you that this was something you just have to pick up as you go along, using your common sense and intuition, and that with practice you would eventually figure it out, the way that teachers do when asked what it means to say that a sentence is awkward. Fortunately, I can be more helpful than that. There is an excellent technique you can use when you're searching for a semantic feature. You can make a list of reality statements. It may be that the one-celled amoeba perceives reality directly, just as it is, with no filter between itself and what is really there. We will never know. We do know that humans can't function like that. The flood of information we must handle every moment of our lives is so overwhelming that if it weren't filtered, it would soon drive us mad. We reduce that flood to a manageable trickle, and we process and organize what remains. The result is a reality composed of a set of simple statements, like these. All beavers have tails. $70,000 is a large sum. The President of the United States lives in the White House. Sugar melts in water. Fire is hot, and so on. A culture, a human society, with all its snaps and buttons on, is formed whenever a group of people have many such reality statements in common. If all those shared statements could be listed, they would constitute a reality consensus for that culture. And this is just as true for the culture of a business or organization as it is for the culture of a nation or ethnic group. A semantic feature is shorthand for at least one reality statement. A diagram showing the word mother with the feature plus female attached is shorthand for the reality statement, all mothers are female. The feature notation is more efficient in terms of time and energy, the way contemporary numbers are more efficient than Roman numerals. Furthermore, finding features forces you to be specific. You can't waffle with the feature the way you can with a sentence, but it helps to work in both directions, to expand features into reality statements and to reduce the reality statements to semantic features. Each serves as a check on the other, isolating flaws and making them apparent, as when you think you have found a feature but discover that it takes half a dozen reality statements to expand it. And the process of expanding and reducing, which is a kind of semantic translation, will help you fill in the gaps. When you come upon a reality gap word like failure, a word that attracts suspicion, by turning up repeatedly in interactions you are dissatisfied with, begin the semantic feature analysis for yourself. Write the troublesome word on a sheet of paper. Beneath it, write down the semantic features that occur to you as part of its meaning for you personally. Give them their plus or minus values as you perceive them, If the weight of a given feature is important to you, rank the value from double minus to double plus. For example, in defining the word bird, there is no need to rank the feature feathered for its weight in pluses or minuses. Human beings do not suffer communication breakdowns over the issue of how feathered a bird happens to be. When you have listed the features that readily occur to you, stop. Don't struggle to add more. Instead, convert those features to reality statements. Now, you have a rough draft of the meaning this reality gap word has for you. You have a tentative set of semantic features and a tentative set of reality statements. Because you are more accustomed to writing sentences than to writing features, it will be easier for you to find gaps if you work in that direction using the following steps. 1. Look at your set of reality statements and decide whether you think it is complete and correct. If so, go to step 5. If not, go to step 2. Step 2. Do you see an immediate need to add other statements? If so, write them down. 3. Do you feel that you have 2 or more statements that should be a single statement instead? If so, revise the list and combine the 2 into 1. 4. Do you see statements that are irrelevant to the context you are working with? For example, the statement, human beings breathe oxygen, is not likely to be relevant unless you plan to do your negotiating at the bottom of the ocean or in some equally unusual environment. Eliminate those from the list. When you are satisfied with a set of statements, go the other direction. Translate them into semantic features. Number 6, go back and forth between the two sets of data until you feel that the task is complete. At the end of this process, which you will be able to do very quickly once you've worked through a few examples, you will have an organized and properly indexed representation of the word's meaning for you. Your goal is then to use communication, both verbal and nonverbal, to find out whether the other person's representation of the word's meaning differs from yours. And if it does, to determine what the differences are and whether they matter in the context of your interaction with that person. You can ask questions like the following, inserting reality statements from your own list in the blanks. Do you feel that blank? I wonder, do you agree that blank? It has often been said that blank. Do you think that's accurate? Does the fact that blank causes you any concern? If the negotiation is critical or simply as a way of building your semantic directory, take a copy of your own semantic diagram for the word with you and fill in the differences on that sheet as you locate them. After the negotiation, fill in the other person's name along with any other information necessary for indexing what you have learned, and file the sheet for future reference. Single definition over and over again. You can then index the members of that set, as for example, failure -1, failure -2, failure -3. Therefore, you will only need to write new names on the page as you run into people and learn which failure is dominant in their picture of the world. Only with cultures other than your own will you keep running into new sets of features and new values. Warning. The longer it takes you to pin down a particular feature and the more reluctant you feel to bother, the more likely it is that getting at that feature really matters. I'm going to stop here. We've only got a couple of pages left of this one. We'll continue with semantics and body language next. I appreciate you listening. Thank you.